ago we had a classical U training. Every year the teachers, we look at different ways of assessment and teaching, and we looked at some classical Christian videos on teaching assessment. And what we didn't realize was this growing movement towards sort of not using grades so much. And so when Nick brought this topic up, I said, wow, this is great. And you know, it really does fall right in line with classical education. It's just a matter of how do we implement such a thing. Anyway, Nick wants to make sure up front that he's going to mention a few teachers' names, and he doesn't mean anything disrespectful by it within his presentation. Also, Nick would like to thank, these are his words, I want to thank God for guidance, Miss Beth for being the best, Mr. Wade for being W, I hope that doesn't stand for worst, Mr. Booty, Miss Layla, and Mr. JC for insight, parents for respect and support, friends for motivation and laughs. And so his title, A Mid-Semester's Nightmare, Why Your Grades Aren't Right and How Ungrading is the Solution. All right, I'm going to set the timer and I'll tell you when you can start.
Imagine being forced to write and refine a singular thesis to perfection for an entire year. You'd think the journey would be like a hill, easy to start with, some difficulty in the middle, but easy again in the final steps of revising. Wrong. At the start, you research so much information until your brain can't remember it all, so you have to take notes. Then at each and every step of writing, you realize your initial research wasn't sufficient, so you research once more. Finally, a few days after you've submitted your thesis, you get your paper back. However, you see nothing changed on it. Just a grade. 70. Though you got the bare minimum to pass, you never knew what was wrong. So on D-Day, you failed your presentation and didn't graduate. All because of that one grade. How could something so unfair happen, something you never deserve, and the one thing that caused you to fail class? Why don't we stop using grades? Grades come from a long history, dating back to the 13th century, where schools for the general public, much less grades, didn't even exist yet. Research shows that education began in cathedral schools, where students ensured their mastery through subjective oral debates at the end of their education. In other words, assessment was informal and unstandardized. However, later in the 18th century, since the number of attending students skyrocketed, Cambridge introduced letter grades like ABCs, and Yale rated students into ranks, numbering 1 to 4, creating the GPA. Oral debates also became written end-of-year exams, which transitioned to end-of-semester exams until nowadays, teachers give exams just about whenever they want. Recently, teachers even use online tools to sort students, which, as experts say, reduces them to mere rows on a spreadsheet. Although originally meant to evaluate, improve, and motivate students, grades nowadays just organize them without really serving their original purpose. Schools like Montessori and Antioch University have thus switched to ungrading by being grade-free and also emphasizing in mastery over measuring. In addition, 18 out of the top 20 elite medical schools use pass-fail systems for preclinical courses, since they have determined that basic science grades do not affect their later quality as actual physicians. So do grades even matter? What makes a school actually a school? Well, in this day and age, education refers to teaching or learning in schools or similar environments. Schools are institutions that use grades to assess students, and grades, according to the Oxford Dictionary, come from the Latin root word gradus, meaning step or tool to measure. So grades are the tools to measure using numbers, letters, or words. On the other hand, ungrading uses different methods of assessment while reducing grades as much as possible. Though not removing all grades, ungrading removes them when unnecessary, since teachers could assess students in more holistic ways without using grades. Schools should implement ungrading because because grades themselves have caused students to hate school and even learning as a whole, putting the future of education at stake. Though humans are naturally curious and love to learn, they end up too lazy, so they got incentivized to prefer easier tasks, dislike learning, and even cheat on tests or assignments. Nowadays, grade-related cheating has drastically increased, becoming the norm among students. Research shows that 60% of students cheated during online exams in the pandemic, and that's only including the ones that admitted to it. With that in mind, schools should implement ungrading for 3 main reasons. Since grades hinder education, ungrading benefits education, and ungrading restores the original purpose of education. First and foremost, schools should implement ungrading not due to its benefits, but because grades themselves hamper education. According to Susan Blum, grades are inconsistent, informative, and have negative side effects. Not every teacher teaches or grades the same, so obviously grades will be inconsistent. For example, if Mr. Wade upholds participation of utmost importance in class, while Miss Layla upholds handwriting to be more significant, they will grade the same student differently. If a student always participated in class but had bad handwriting, then Mr. Wade might have given them 100, while Miss Layla might have failed them. In addition, to being inconsistent, grades are also informative. Getting 85% on an essay could mean that a student wrote a perfect essay, but only finished 85% of it. It is even possible that the teacher saw that he didn't use punctuation, so he was reduced by 15%. And it is once again even possible that this teacher thought that the essay was just not good enough, so they gave 85% as the final grade. Just giving the grade is not enough. And even if comments were given alongside of it, research shows that grades still hinder student performance. For centuries, students have been assessed through subjective oral debates. However, recently, Dr. Yong Zhao states that grades themselves have brought negative side effects tantamount to medicine, such as reducing student interest in learning, discouraging risk-taking, and even cheating. Even though humans are naturally curious and love to learn, because of this, they think that they require a uniformity and need to be assessed on the same scale. Now, although everyone being graded from 1 to 100 might seem fair at first, the fact that everyone is graded the same way is what negatively impacts school culture. There is no single standard that can assess everyone, since each and every human being is unique in their own way. For example, if Mr. Abe was a math genius with an average of 100%, he might seem better compared to Mr. Wade, who struggles with an average of 70%. However, there are always reasons behind such numbers. While Mr. Abe may seem like a math genius, Mr. Wade might actually excel in other things, and only get 70% due to his preferences, style of learning, and personal life. Nobody starts from the same point, learns the same way, or ends up with the same results. While some people may excel in studies like math or sciences, others might excel in music or arts. Another reason why grades hinder education is because they misdirect students' attention. Although initially, students learn for the sake of learning, the thirst of knowledge, or just curiosity's sake, nowadays they just pursue grades. According to Mr. Booty's testimony, he said, "Whenever I give grades and tell them that actually my warm-up exercise will not be graded, all my students feel relief. But they never even try to correct what's wrong. In addition, whenever I meet my students in the hallway, all they ever ask me about is, what grade will I get for my test, or when will it be graded? This shows that Mr. Booty's students only cares about the grade and not what material they learned. And even if they get good grades, it does not necessarily mean that they'll remember what was taught. For example, if I asked all the people here what they learned in SOL or maybe what you learned in grammar, I bet 9 out of 10 times you would not remember anything, not the material nor the real life implications, even if you aced all your tests. Because grades are not good for traditional usages as it was originally meant for, ungrading should be used as it benefits education. Through methods such as contract grading, authentic assessments, and process letters, schools' assessment would become student-centered and fair. According to the Center for Transformative Teaching, contract grading utilizes a contract or agreement between students and teachers to decide on how much work a student must do in order to achieve a certain grade. In other words, assessment will not be based off correctness anymore, rather by progress and effort. The thing is, grades are rigid like a ruler. They normally require you, through true or false, multiple choice, or essay questions, to find the right answer or specific keywords. Authentic assessment, on the other hand, goes beyond memorizing a topic and finds different ways so that students could connect the dots to real-world circumstances. In addition, process letters could also improve assessment by having students write a letter to describe their learning process and how it has improved them. Other than benefiting evaluation, ungrading also motivates students through project-based learning. Project-based learning utilizes practical assignments so students can apply what they learn instead of just memorizing the topic. For example, Aaron Blackwelder made his students, rather than writing a 5-paragraph essay on the Odyssey, which some might view as tiresome, into an imaginary courtroom where students played roles like Odysseus or the Cyclops and put them on trial. This made students part of the actual classroom and the center of the learning environment rather than the grades. Because ungrading does this, it is also important to know that ungrading can improve a student's well-being. While research shows that 70% of students and teenagers have experienced or witnessed depression and anxiety amongst their friends or themselves, ungrading can remove this by being fun and engaging. Unlike how bad grades cause students to not take risks or go out of their comfort zone, ungrading creates this sandbox for students to embrace challenges and learn from their mistakes. For example, although in class students normally don't participate because they fear of saying the wrong answer and the repercussions that may come with it, ungrading creates this growth mindset so that students would be more willing to discuss what they normally fear asking, and thus increase their emotional well-being. Last but not least, ungrading restores the original purpose of education. Without realizing, many teachers tend to focus too much on giving the grade that they forget about doing the actual work of keeping the class interested in the topic. Although delivering the material well and assessing students according to a standard may be important aspects of education, it becomes useless if teachers do not keep the class engaged. From a different perspective, it's like parents using violence and teachers using grades. When a parent uses violence to teach their children a lesson because it gets the job done quickly and their children would immediately obey, teachers use grades because it's efficient, effective, and also gets the job done quickly. Another reason why schools should implement ungrading is because it makes the process between students and teachers more humanizing. The thing is, grades are too good and efficient that teachers never really know each and every student. However, ungrading focuses on non-academic needs, thus making students engaged in their own education. The connection between teachers and students stops being just graded and grader, but becomes a supportive relationship between humans. Above all, ungrading restores the purpose of learning back to learning itself. By focusing on feedback, students would be willing to learn and improve rather than just focusing on their grades. According to the book Atomic Habits, written by James Clear, this can be similarly described using the idea of goals and lifestyle. For example, while a runner's goal may be to get first place in a race, he will only try to achieve that goal. However, if the runner's goal is to have the lifestyle of a runner, then he would continue to run for the rest of his life. Likewise, if students' goal was to get a specific grade on their test or to pass or something like that, then they would only stop learning once they've achieved their goal. But if their goal is to have the lifestyle of a learner, then they would continue to learn for a lifetime. Nevertheless, some people still believe that ungrading lacks a specific point of mastery and fails to display that. While ungrading does indeed lack a specific standardized rubric, such a rubric can provide misinformation about a student's mastery. For example, if a student performed well on a quiz, but during some unprecedented factors on the test, he just couldn't perform well, such as lack of sleep or probably family matters, then it would not display his mastery properly. Although he initially displayed mastery in the quiz, those unprecedented factors causes the student to not display the same mastery in the test. On the flip side, if schools implemented ungrading, then students could learn at their own pace and teachers could properly understand their mastery. For example, one teacher in specific had used ungrading and decided that at the end of the year, she'd allow her students to choose their own grade. In this situation, she knew that her students were honest because at the end of the year, one of her students even gave themselves an F for their final grade. And even if they lied, the next year's struggle will teach them firsthand that they require more effort and thus display their mastery. In spite of that, some people still believe that ungrading lacks a reference point. While this may be true, transcripts and grades themselves also are inconsistent and do not serve as a trusted reference point for colleges and universities. To understand this, it is first important to ask, why do we require essays? What about SATs, like standardized tests? In this real world, between a 4.0 and a 3.0 GPA student, colleges might even choose the 3.0 GPA student if they had a better essay. To begin with, if standards and grades were so good, then teachers and colleges would not require standardized tests like the SAT to exist. However, the fact is that they do still need them. With that in mind, schools should implement ungrading not because the fact that they don't lack a reference point, but because even though they lack a reference point and grades still lack the reference point, and ungrading would serve as a better standard even though grades and ungrading lack the same thing, because ungrading has the more positives compared to grades itself. To sum everything up, we have explored why schools should implement ungrading, because grades themselves help education while ungrading benefits it, and because ungrading restores the original purpose of education. And now, we come back to where it all started. Why don't we stop using grades? Let's turn back time to when you were first asked to imagine that singular thesis you had to write for an entire year. As you know, it's hell. However, this time, you don't see a 70. In fact, you don't see any grade at all. But this time, your paper is colored yellow with comments, and you have to revise it even more. However, your teacher gives you input on areas you need to improve and also where you fall short. You discuss with your teacher on where to improve, and over time, you end up better. But that's just a fantasy. It's nothing real yet. So what if we do nothing? What if we just leave grades as is? Well, you and your fellow students would continue to suffer the unjust consequences of grades. Teachers would never know why their students aren't performing as they wish, and the future would crumble in the hands of these unmotivated, cheating, monkey-brained students. So what does this mean for all of you? The challenge now is to take the next step, that is ungrading. As the current teachers and parents of this generation, and as the students of the future generation that will lead us into a better society, here are the 3 things that you can do right now. First and foremost, and obviously hardest of all, is to change your mindset on grades and education as a whole. Rather than focusing on the grades, you should focus on the material thought and the potential use of what you're learning. And teachers right now could even also focus towards implementing ungrading itself. That is the second point, which is teachers should implement ungrading in their classes right now. Implementing ungrading is surprisingly simple. Through methods such as project-based learning, we could use more practical assignments and real-world circumstances where teachers would understand and have a better way of connecting with the students. Teachers could also use one-on-one discussions to implement ungrading and discuss a student's mastery better. Last but not least, everyone should focus towards implementing ungrading together so that it could be implemented well for the future of us all. A future where education is enjoyed and where people strive to create a better place. Let us innovate, let us ungrade, and let us communicate this better world together. Thank you.
I love to read your thesis document also last night, and I think what you try to say is really something that is matter in education, especially this is something what we believe as well in Christian classical education approach. But then, I still have questions. Okay, so can we start with the first one? When you say about the like the original purpose of the education, can you share with us like then how does the ungrading will help to fostering a deeper understanding and mastery of subjects among students?
Thank you for the question. So I'd like to clarify first, are you asking how ungrading would show the mastery of students?
Yeah, to help fostering the deeper understanding.
So how students would understand the lesson better through ungrading?
Yeah.
Okay. So the thing about ungrading is that since it focuses more on the student, it would give more detailed explanations, not just through lectures, but through other methods, as I said before, like project-based learning, where students would be the focus and the part of their learning environment rather than just the grades or the material being taught. And I believe that that way, students would learn firsthand, through some sort of practicality, that how the lesson or the material works. And that should help deepen their mastery.
Do you think that it's going to contribute to be more holistic in education?
Yes, I do believe that.
Can you elaborate further? Why do you think it's going to be more holistic?
I believe that ungrading would help make it more holistic because of the sort of way that ungrading carries itself out. Ungrading does it in a way so that students would not have to focus too much on stuff outside of the learning and could have a more, in a sense, relaxed time, but still being forced to, not forced, but they're more willing to do things as they would be the focus and be doing the things that they enjoy, or at least doing things that they know would help them, rather than just thinking that, oh, I should do this for the grades.
Okay. What if we see students also that they love learning, but also at the same time they love to compete, not compete towards others, probably to themselves, like how to be better, and they aim and probably that they're going to feel satisfied when they see the grades. So what you're going to say about that kind of situation?
In regards to that situation, I believe that is correlating towards how grades themselves can motivate students. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, I'd like to clarify first that motivation actually consists of two different types. From my research, we have intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation being the type of motivation where students are willing to learn a specific topic because they enjoy the learning process itself. Meanwhile, extrinsic motivation being where they're motivated to do something because of external rewards or consequences. And in this case, grades themselves are extrinsic motivation because students want to do something because the grades exist there and they think, oh, I get a good grade, that's a nice thing. But I believe that education's focus shouldn't be like, I could get a good grade, rather I understand this and I enjoy doing it, so I look more into it. So I believe that viewing grades as sort of a reward and they enjoy it, that sort of mindset itself is already bad, and we should switch towards focusing on the material that's interesting and that we'd enjoy.
I like what you're sharing. By the way, I thought your presentation was fantastic, and I love this topic. I think it's such a great topic for us to have a conversation about. So I have lots of ideas and things to talk about, but let's focus on what you just were mentioning here. So let me ask you, do you feel that there might be a place, an appropriate place though, for extrinsic motivation? In other words, if we don't have any extrinsic incentives to motivate ourselves, do we ever achieve intrinsic motivation?
Thank you for your question. I believe that through intrinsic motivation, it is potentially possible for intrinsic motivation to be achieved. However, I sort of view this as the idea of, let's use this example of faith and good works. So there's this common saying how, oh, you need to have faith or you need to have good works, but in reality you have to have both, right? But some people think that if you have good works, you can have faith. But the reality is that through faith, you will automatically do good works. So I believe that if students were intrinsically motivated, then they would automatically pursue things, and sort of like as a side effect or like automatically cause, they would be getting the good grades as a result and be extrinsically motivated as well. But if the intrinsic motivation is the initial cause, they're not necessarily going to be intrinsically motivated.
I know what you're saying. C.S. Lewis writes in an essay, I think it's The Weight of Glory, he talks about that our life is like the student, and in the beginning, like he uses the example of learning Greek. And he says in the beginning, nobody enjoys learning Greek and learning all of the rules of Greek and has to, at first they're just doing it for the marks, for the grades, or maybe for fear of disappointing their parents, right? Some other motivation, right? But as the student progresses in the subject, he sort of talks about how at some point that something happens that the student is almost unaware of, where the enjoyment of the subject begins to take hold because he's able to read something in the original Greek. And suddenly, without him realizing it, he's enjoying that subject. But he doesn't really know exactly when that occurred. When did it flip from that extrinsic motivation to the intrinsic motivation? And C.S. Lewis uses that as an analogy for our lives, right? In other words, in the beginning, I obeyed God because I was afraid of going to hell, right? And so like, oh, I want to obey God so I can do the right thing and I hope he accepts me, right? And you start kind of with this extrinsic motivation. I need to follow the rules of the law. And then somewhere along the way, love breaks through. And it flips my motivation, like you said, to where it starts to become the outflow of what I am instead of something that's externally being forced upon me. So I guess what I'm really wanting to ask about grades is, considering the nature of man, we're fallen, we're broken, we're sinful, I think we're just sort of lazy sometimes. I don't know about you, but I'm lazy. So I sometimes need something to like kick me in the rear end to get me going and make me do it. So do you think that we could have a balance of ungrading and grading. Is there a place for maybe both and, or is it either or for you?
I'd like to clarify first that ungrading and grades themselves, in a sense, could have a balance.
Okay.
But I'd also like to clarify that ungrading itself is not actually removing all grades.
Okay, that's important. So explain a little more about that, because I think that passed us by pretty quick. Because we keep hearing ungrading, which sounds like you're saying, do away with all grades. But I don't think that's what you're arguing. So help us understand that.
So in my definition, I clarified that ungrading does not remove all grades. Rather, it reduces them as much as possible, since obviously students and teachers could use assessment without grades. And the thing is that there is a difference between ungrading and non-grading. There have been articles about non-grading where they completely don't use grades, right?
Okay,
Meanwhile, ungrading just takes them out when unnecessary.
got it. I see what you're saying. So you're kind of, maybe, can I rephrase it? Maybe the argument is you're wanting to de-emphasize the place that grades have in the mind of the student and in the mind of the teacher, so that we can focus more on the learning process and the enjoyment of discovery and learning. Is that, yeah, okay. Totally in agreement with that. I love that so much. Okay, do you have another question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so may I now go to the challenge? Yeah, a little bit. Okay, so let's say that if we are going to transitioning, let's say, to the ungrading system, are there particular subjects or grade levels where ungrading might be more challenging to implement?
I believe that as people grow older and the sort of stuff that they have to learn becomes a bit more complex, it might seem difficult to utilize ungrading. Like, for example, in SOR, for example, you might think that it's hard to use ungrading because we have many different subjects that usually require grades, like math, sciences. However, I believe that although difficult, it is still possible to integrate ungrading towards a certain extent, where we could reduce the grades in certain classes, and even in classes like math and sciences, it's still possible to reduce grades when we don't really need them. But it will be harder, obviously, compared to the lower grade levels, where the main focus is learning and not really seeing our sort of output and progress. Yeah.
So do you want to say that in the grade 12, you need more grading system compared to the lower grades?
Although we might use more grades, I don't think that our grading system has to necessarily be more, because through those some subjects might seem that they require grades, unlike the lower grades. I feel that we could still implement ungrading in every lesson. So if the idea is like, do you think we should use ungrading in less lessons? No. But do you think the amount of grades that will be like existing, would there be more grades? Probably.
Okay. Yeah, because the next question that it's going to lead towards is, let's say you are going to go to university, right? Then as the next institution that will recruit you as a college student, do you think that they need the grading systems that in traditional we have compared to the ungrading system that you wish we implement?
So obviously it would be hard for higher education and other institutions to sort of accept high school students who don't have grades, which is the really good part about ungrading, as it doesn't require you to remove all grades.
Right.
So one thing that ungrading can do in SOR is that we can sort of remove grades on a daily basis. So for example, things like our math homework or your participations in class, the things you do on a daily basis basically, you don't really need grades there. However, in the end, you can use grades for like your final exams, because at the end of the day, all the colleges look at are your transcripts, which showcase one final grade. And I feel that you can find this final grade at only one or two, a few times basically. So the point is to have less grades compared to now in the daily basis. But if you still need a grade at the end to showcase the colleges or universities, then I believe that we could still do that.
So I want to ask you back to your holistic mindset, which I think is really the right mindset for education, because we want to shape and form a person, not just a computer, like a box full of knowledge, right? So I guess the question I would have is, how do you address the character and spiritual formation side of a student's life through ungrading? For instance, if we say, okay, we're going to do away with all grades, and there's just going to be one grade at the end of the semester based on this semester-long, project-based learning that we've done, i.e. the senior thesis. Is project-based learning, in case you weren't aware. Yeah. So if you're doing that, how do you help spur the kids on throughout a long year of doing something that's really hard and difficult? As you mentioned, there's times where it feels like you're kind of in hell,
Yeah.
But at the end of it, you can look back and be like, I think I learned something through this and it really grew me, right? But how do you keep people going along if you don't have grades somehow attached, like to participation or something? I mean, what would you suggest?
I believe that in this case, the idea of student-centered comes into play, because obviously when students are not motivated to do stuff, it's hard for them to do the things that they do. And in thesis, the way I see it is that many students sort of struggle to continue, and you say that the grades like help them, like, oh yeah, I just need to get these grades, so they still do it. And while that may be true, still, like I said before, that is still extrinsic motivation. So I feel that students should find the topic that they enjoy, and if they really enjoy doing it, then they would continue to do their thesis without focusing on the grades.
Right. No, I mean, I think that's the ideal. I'm just thinking that not every person is going to fall into that category, because maybe not everybody is ready for that switch to happen where it becomes that intrinsic motivation. So I'm saying from a teacher perspective, if you're managing a group of students and you have them at all different levels of where they are in their development of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, then what system could ungrading do that would help to bring those students that are still kind of not really, it's not internalized yet? How do we get them to start internalizing? What do you suggest?
I feel that as humans, as social creatures, we tend to really sort of build up on each other. And I feel that by using that idea, our peers can sort of motivate each other to sort of do what we need to do. And teachers themselves could also just like tell students like, oh, you should do this, we should do this together. And by having this sort of environment where everyone is doing the material and learning not because of the grades, over time, those that don't get motivated intrinsically will switch to also become like that.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad suggestion. I think if I'm remembering correctly, in your third action item, call to action, you said do it in community. And I think that community aspect is really important. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing we could probably talk about for an hour,
Yes.
right, or more.
Like, I have lots more questions, but I'm
We've
trying
got
to let
lots
other
of questions.
people.
I've got lots of questions. I'll ask you one real quickly. It seems to me like to do this well, you're also kind of, the teacher has to be more one-on-one with the students. And so maybe you need a smaller student-to-teacher ratio so that teachers can really work one-on-one. Do you think that's right?
I believe that we don't have to necessarily always be one-on-one. Like if you're still having one teacher for a class of 15 students, it's still feasible. However, maybe we could have one-on-one discussions at certain intervals. That way teachers could spend more time with the student and still make time for other things. Like for example, I don't think we do it anymore, but back then, we used to have this time where students get the report cards, right? And the students had to come. But nowadays, they only meet the teacher if they fail on the lesson, correct?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I don't like that system.
Yeah.
I think everybody should come and have a
Yeah.
conversation about it. Yeah.
I believe that maybe instead of semesterly, maybe quarterly, each student could meet up with the teacher and they could sort of have a one-on-one discussion, sort of evaluating how they've done over the semester and how they could improve for the future.
Yeah, and one of the things that grades, I think, actually do, maybe accidentally, is it allows schools to hire teachers who are not really masters at a subject because they have a curriculum, they have some worksheets and things that they can put a grade on. It also requires schools to have better teachers, I think. Don't you think that's right?
Yeah, I believe so, because I'm not gonna name people, but there are occasionally teachers who, as I said previously, focus too much on the grade, that sometimes they just sit back and let the students do the work as they just grade. However, I feel that if the teacher were with the students, sort of guiding them, it provides a better environment for the students.
Yeah, and so I would argue that that's actually not a fault of grades, but I would just say that's actually just better teacher practices, pedagogy, and that's something we can improve. That I'm not sure that grades create that. I think that comes from a teacher's insecurity of not feeling like they're masters of that subject. And so that may be something that as a school we need to look at. How do we make sure we're equipping our teachers to feel like they can lead students well, right? Yeah.
I want to stick in one question that kind of comes from your peers, and it's about, and it's related to what we've already talked about, motivation. If we were to say, let's don't have grades next year or a lot fewer, don't you think immediately we would just have lazy kids who are cheering it on and let's don't do anything? Doesn't it take time to develop this, the mindset? Doesn't it start from the kids in grammar school and go all the way, and by the time you've got 12 years of that, you've got kids at senior thesis that really do run into thesis excited? What do you think?
I believe that if you want to implement ungrading on a stronger scale for smaller children, it would work out better. However, as I said previously, if we implement ungrading now, we don't have to completely change the curriculum. However, for students in senior thesis or SOR or SOL who are already catered towards grades, I believe that we can implement smaller steps by using more project-based type of learning and also having more discussions rather than just lectures.
Oh, I think that's fantastic.
So,
Can I add something?
Time's over, but you can add one.
Okay, I want to add just one thing because have you thought about how this relates to your career in the future? Because everyone's going to go be an employee somewhere, and if you're not the owner of the business, you're going to have a performance appraisal. And guess what your performance appraisal is? A score, and it's a grade. And it sometimes feels reductionistic. It can feel defeating, right? But at the same time, it also can be formative because your boss is giving you feedback. So yeah, I just wanted you to consider, if we ungrade, what would happen if we did ungrading on a large scale and then we send kids out into the world and suddenly you have performance appraisals and you're being told you're a 2. I don't know. What do you think that would be dangerous, or how would that work?
I feel that if students went to the outside world and they're appraised by numbers through companies and businesses alike, that's something that the world has to slowly develop and change on its own. It's not going to happen over time. But obviously, as there are many businesses, you need data to sort of assess different people. However, in the world of learning, education, I believe that it is more solid if we implemented ungrading rather than data itself, because we're still learning. We're teaching a student how to learn, not how to take a test or get into a job.
Love it.
All right, great job, Nick. Thank you. Good job.